Howdy, folks. Welcome back to JJ's Library and Readings. Told you I'd record another one after the one I just posted. You guys deserve two videos on the same day because I missed Monday. So we're back with another one. I pretty much told you about my day. The most I can say is pay your bills, work hard, do cardio, right? That's the slogan of the channel right now, I guess. Lean is law, right? But I reckon we should get into it. So, I got what? I got Between Two Fires again with chapter 12 of The Ones Who Knock by Night. So, I hope you're on your couch or your bed, and I hope you got some coffee and ready to smoke your cob. Maybe you have a alcoholic beverage. That would be pretty dope. I've been craving some beer recently, but you know, beer's not the best for you. But anyways, let's get into it. This is a little bit of a shorter chapter. So chapter 12. When they got to the door of the woodcarver's house, Thomas had the good sense not to knock. He said, "Priest," and then the girl said, "Anante, it's me." The bolt slid back and the door opened, the woodcarver motioning them in. The married couple and the priest were all pale with fear. Gian whispered into Thomas' ear, "They're here, in the corridor." "I know," Thomas said. "They're close." The husband and wife stared at the shuttered windows and bolted doors, listening to the sounds of knocking, which were unmistakably drawing nearer. Thomas picked up his chainmail, hauberk, and began slithering into it. He put on his mail gloves as well. Nate said an Ave Maria, which her husband and the priest joined in, though the priest was watching the girl. Delphine inclined near the wick and tallow, which was now a soupy graveyard for moths. Moths lighted in her hair and fluttered around her as she opened the tube the Jew had given her. Its hinges were tiny and delicate, but her small hands were made to open such things. The inside of the tube was cushioned with brown leather, upon which the mud-colored shaft of pitted iron was hardly visible. She took it in her hand. It was not that she it was not what she expected. Not leaf bladed or triangular like a boar spear, rather, it was a thin rod that flared gently at the point of an end, more of a fire poker than a proper spear. She tested the point with her thumb and found it still sharp enough to make her gasp in a hitch of air. Had this piece of metal really been driven under one of his ribs? It seemed impossible that anything or anyone still in the world had actually touched him. But it had. This was it. She kissed the spearhead and sealed back in its case. The word Pilum occurred to her, and she wondered if she had read it in her father's books, or if it simply came to her as so many words had lately. "What is that?" Pierre Matthew said. "You know what it is." None of them slept. They stood around the table or sat against the wall. Near Dodd, something heavy brushed against the front of the building. Delphine held her breath, then nearly peed herself when the mule brayed next to her. Now something scratched at the shuttered window. "Please God, please angels, do not leave me alone," she prayed. The priest stood in front of her and put his hands on her chest. She grabbed his little finger and felt that he was shaking. Thomas and Jan had moved near the door, the knight with his sword behind them, ready to strike, the woodcutter holding a mallet. "Get back," John whispered to his wife, but she kept her place just behind him. Whatever was outside tapped at the window. Delphine grabbed the priest's finger so hard she could have hurt him if he had not been too agitated to feel it. It tapped again, more urgently. Everyone but Thomas and the girl made the sign of the cross. "Come, Saint Michael. Come, Saint Sebastian. Do not leave us alone," Delphine whispered. But she felt abandoned. They were going to be killed now by some wicked thing, and God would not or could not interfere. The thing outside took two heavy steps and now banged on the door, hard. Delphine squealed. Jan put his free hand over his wife's mouth to stop her from whimpering. But then he whimpered. Delphine heard Thomas breathing in and out like a bellows, preparing to fight. She knew that for all his faults, he would die before he let harm come to her. She felt much safer. Then it banged again so hard that a flake of dub fell off the wall and the building shook, rocking the several long-headed wooden saints and virgins in the workshop. The mule brayed badly and shuffled from side to side, restless for room to move or kick. It knocked over its water bucket, and Delphine felt the water between her toes. The banging continued, faster and faster. It was maddening. Thomas began to reach for the door, ready to have done with it, but Jean pushed his arm down and shook his head, wide-eyed with fear and warning. Now everyone became quiet. It stayed quiet for some time, but Delphine knew it wasn't over. The grown-ups in the room were frozen like clockwork figures, and soon they would move again, urgently. As Hel came into the room, waiting was so hard. The priest stroked her hair once, as he might have done to a calm dog. She heard his fast breathing and kissed his hand. His breathing slowed. That was when they heard it, a baby's cry. In the street just outside the door. "Oh, sweet God," Annette said, moving towards the door. Her husband pushed her back and shook his head, too scared to speak. The baby cried again, bawling in terror or pain. "We have to," Annette shouted. Now a woman's voice came to them through the oak door. "Please," it begged. Anante struggled with her husband, but he kept her back. "Please help us. In the name of mercy, I beg you," the woman's voice implored. "My baby, help my baby." The child cried again, more pathetically now, ending in an alarming rasp. "I don't think you should open it," Delphine said quietly, too scared to make herself heard even by the priest. She knew she should speak louder, but she couldn't. Thomas over his shoulder at the priest, who crossed himself and nodded. "Help my baby." Delphine let go of the priest's hand and moved to grab Thomas's arm, but she was too late. She watched helplessly as the door opened. A woman, no, a statue of a woman, with a crown, the Virgin. Delphine's heart leapt with gladness that they were saved, and then it sank just as quickly, and she did what herself. The door had opened on a 6-foot statue of the Holy Virgin with the high crown, holding a scepter in one hand, but where the Holy Infant should have been, cradled in the other, her stone hand held the ankle of an infant who dangled upside down with the purplish skin of plague victim. She had been dead for some time. Flies buzzed around him. His milky eyes saw nothing, and yet he opened his swollen mouth and cried again. "Help my baby," the statue said, its mouth moving jerkily. It ducked its crown and stepped into the room with the sound of a millstone grinding, and everyone recoiled from it. Now, it flung the infant at Thomas so hard it knocked him backward. Delphine grabbed at it, and when it moved, it somehow seemed like a statue seen in glimpses. It moved fast but choppily. It was impossible. The fight was awful. It was so hard to see in the near darkness of the candlelit workshop. Delphine shook her head, trying to wake up from what couldn't be happening. The unholy Virgin had Annette by the arm. The arm broke. It bit something off her face and spat it at Jehan. It stove her head in with its scepter. "God, God, why, sweet Annette?" "No!" Delphine tried to scream, but it came out like a kitten's meow. The priest pulled Delphine behind him again, saying a Pater Noster, but she looked around his robes. Thomas had flipped his sword, holding it near the point, bludgeoning the living statue, making sparks and chipping it, but he could not stop it. It wanted the wood carver now. Jean's mallet knocked a point off the crown, but then it lowered its head like a bull and gored him against the wall, again and again, shaking the building with force of it. A trio of wooden Marys seemed to look on helplessly as a stone version of themselves killed their maker. Now it was coming for the night. Thomas, putting his back into a low swing, broke a foot off it, but it dropped to all fours and bit and gored him. Toppling wooden statues, wrecking everything around it, it swept out the scepter, hitting his leg hard, almost spilling him. He grunted in pain, then lashed down and broke the scepter. "Get the spear." Delphine ran to the table where the flute-shaped case held the spearhead, and she grabbed it. Just before she panicked, Mule kicked the table over, almost on top of her. She opened the case. The priest said her name. She handed him the spear, and he understood. Thomas had broken great pieces off the abomination, but still it kept after him, until it saw what the priest held. It flipped over sideways like an acrobat doing an arch, and righted its head, making the priest stop. It grinned at him. The black euchre came out of its mouth. It grabbed the dead infant and whipped it around, trying to knock the spear out of Pierre Matthew's hand. "Touch it," Delphine yelled now. "It doesn't want you to touch it." The priest stepped forward again. Thomas swung for all he was worth and caught it square in the face before his sword heavy tilt and Quillian's, breaking the nose from it. The priest poked at it with the spear. It scooted backward out the door. "I see you," it said to Delphine through its stone eyes. Did not seem to see anything. She shuddered. "You didn't help the baby," it said, and walked backward into the night. They had little time to mourn their hosts. The priest yelled, "Fire!" as he noticed one wall of the house smoking, licking flames spreading from the pile of wood shavings near Jeanne's work desk. One of the candles had landed where the mule kicked the table over, catching not only the wall but an apron hanging from the corner of the desk. The priest tried to swat out the apron, then tried to swat it against the walls, but only succeeding in stirring the flames to greater activity. Throwing down the apron, he took the mule by its halter and handed it to Thomas, who, with difficulty, led the terrified animal out into the street. The priest now gathered up both the spearhead and its case from the floor, and then he went to Delphine. He had to unmake her fist from what she held strains of Annette's hair to cry into, but then she allowed herself to be picked up. He took through the kitchen and out the back, put her into the cart, gave her the requerie, and then unbolted the door that led from the tiny courtyard garden into the street. Thomas had led the beast around, and now the priest hitched it up. Thomas ducked back into the house for the rest of his and the priest's things, then loped up the stairs for Delphine's sack as she yelled, "Leave it! Hurry!" Choking black smoke sifted up the planks of the bedroom floor, but he found her sack and limped down the stairs, past the now smoldering wooden figures, and through the kitchen. Coughing savagely, his eyes tearing and his face besooted, the knight lifted himself and the goods into the cart. He patted out with his mailed hand the edge of the priest lined in ropes, then they glowed orange and curled, just on the verge of breaking out in flames. Barely noticing this, Pierre Matthew reined the mule, yelling, "Fire! Wake up!" several times for the benefit of any neighbors who might be left alive. They pulled away from the woodcart, Doom's house, and rode into the light of night, dazed and stinking of smoke. They looked warily about them all the way, lest some fresh horror came at them from the blackness of the alley. Thomas coughed intermittently, the priest awkwardly slapping his back. Delphine held her spear tightly, distracting herself by singing while crying. "Hey, little Ramen, sing hey, it is time to fly away. With your strong young wings, as your father sings, is it time to fly away?" The only person they saw was a woman who dragged an old man out of her house and sat him by the door. She had trouble propping him up, but finally managed. When she saw the cart, she said, "Take him, please, I'll pay. I have radishes, you can have them. He was good to me, and I want him buried, please." Thomas shook his head at her. "At least give him last rites. You're a priest, aren't you?" Pierre moaned softly in his throat, but fixed his eyes forward. "Stay in your cart," Thomas said wearily. The priest said, "I'm sorry," too quietly to the woman to hear, and kept the cart moving, even though she followed for a few steps, imploring. The girl, who might have protested, just sang her song again and closed her eyes. On their way out of the quarter, they passed a church whose stone walls were covered with mold and whose stained glass windows had been broken out. Deep tracks from all directions pocked the ground around the building, which stank so badly of rotten mold that they all of them gagged. The life-size statue of the Virgin stood by the door with a bloody broken crown, a missing foot, and no nose. She held the broken haft of a scepter and cradled the abused form of a child dead of plague. The priest stopped his cart. They had to go past the church to get to the bridge. "It's nearly dawn," said the girl. "I don't think they move in daytime." The priest urged the mule forward, but it took its steps slowly, as though it reserved the right to stop the moment it felt inclined to. The church was ghastly. If it had once belonged to heaven, it did not now, and the air around it swarmed with flies. The mule swished his tail or jerked the skin of his flanks constantly against the many flies that landed on him. Flies crawled maddeningly in the priest's arm and hair or landed near Thomas's mouth. They drew closer, hugging as tightly as they could to the shops on the other side of the narrow street, but still coming uncomfortably close to the spoiled eglise. Besides the gruesome Virgin, other statues of saints, kings, and apostles stood on their pedestals. Lighter in color than the greenish black growth quilting the walls, their limbs and faces who splattered here or there with blood. Although it was hard to see in the gray of first light, the blood looked bright and fresh. They had only just returned from their hunt. Did an angel with a missing wing just shift itself? Did a gargoyle lick its forepaw as a dog might? Several of them held small forms that, as the cart drew closer, the knight, the priest, and the girl were sickened to recognize as dead children. A blood-mouthed St. Paul the Apostle held a stone book in one hand, and the other dangled a limp boy child aloft by the head as if the saints were being filleted. The boy's arm was gone entirely, his pale leg swinging gently like a hanged man's. St. Paul turned his stone head and looked squarely at Pierre Mathieu. The priest felt an icy finger in his heart, and then his head exploded in pain as St. Paul assaulted him with a wordless shout. Do you like this bugger, priest? We did this for you, filthy bugger, sodomite drunk. Who the fuck do you think you're fooling? Would you like to climb up here with me and hoist those robbies? Hoc est inum virgem inum. Poislet dropped the reins and put his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. At the same time, a statue of St. Martin pointed his sword at Thomas and split his head with, Coward, have you raped the girl yet? Because you will. Make you rape her in the ass, but not the cunt, because she will be a virgin when you cut her throat for your master, and you know who that is, don't you? St. Anne crouched as though she might leap at the girl, and thought screamed into her head. Everyone you love will die. This priest and the knight, both of them, will die because of you. We will kill them. We don't know what you are, but we will find out even if we have to cut you open, and that toy won't help you. The cart wandered unguided at the three of them, writhed under the words hurled at them, then beyond the buildings. And to the east, behind the clouds, the sun rose unseen, and the voices stopped. The priest collapsed against the good weight of the night and did something like sleeping. Delphine, who had begun to feel nauseated and had a pain in her lower belly, comforted herself by leaning forward to stroke the priest's hair. Thomas took his chain-mail gloves off his shaking hands and took up the reins. The only sounds as they left the Latin Quarter were the clop of the mule's hooves and somewhere the barking of a dog. And that's it for chapter 12. That was a good episode. I hope you all enjoyed the 2 episodes tonight. I should be posting for the rest of the week. I very much appreciate you taking your time for this. I'm kind of sad about those nice people that kept the heroes safe. They seem like really nice people, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of that, of good people dying in this book. So I hope y'all stay tuned. I hope y'all have an amazing day tomorrow. And as always, good morning, good evening, and good night. I'll see y'all tomorrow.